everybody. So my name's Ian Gilbert. Independent thinking came out of my head nearly 28 years ago and is now in so many other people's heads, and wonderful people. And one of the things we've been doing through the pandemic is just increasingly getting online and doing some paid for webinars, but also a lot of free stuff. This is a webinar that's sponsored by our friends at Crown House, who published the Independent Thinking Press books. We did a deal with them where they say, okay, we'll get some of our associates who are really good speakers, good practitioners, good educators, and have also written great books. And you bung us a few quid, we'll put it in the kitty, and we'll just sort of share some of the good practice, share some of the ideas from the books that have been written, and just sort of just have an interesting and useful hour and a half. That's the plan. We've done, this is the fourth one. We did a NQT primary, NQT secondary, and then I think it was last month we did one for new head teachers. So this one is really exciting because we're looking at an area that's close to my heart, which is creativity. It's one of the reasons I started independent thinking right at the very beginning, was to try and spread the idea of creativity. And the focus of the creativity here tonight is around the curriculum. So I'm going to ask each of our four associates to introduce themselves, to just say what they think, in their opinion, what curriculum is. And also, just to explain a little bit, I'm going to wave one of their books at them and just a little bit about what's in the book and why it's relevant to exploring the creative curriculum. So from the top of my pile, because it's the smallest one, is Mark Crease's book, Unhomework. So Mark, tell me who you are, what you're up to now, what you're doing, what right have you got to talk to people about creative curriculum, what's in there, and what do you mean by curriculum?
Okay, thanks, Ian. Welcome, everyone. Nice to be able to speak to you all. So, Mark Creasy, I teach in primary school. I started my career teaching secondary, now working in primary. I'm currently a year 5 teacher, and I lead the curriculum at my school. And thanks to the work I do with independent thinking, I was actually appointed to deliver some of that and do it on a day-to-day basis. So when talk about what I'm going to talk about this evening and be involved with this evening, it's what I do on a daily basis. In Unhomework, it's all about getting more out of children by putting less in, and actually the sort of like tagline of how to get the most out of children without really trying. Actually, that's the big thing, because actually to me, curriculum isn't what goes on in the classroom, it's absolutely everything. It's what goes on outside the classroom, on the walks to school, on the playground, also what goes on at home. And I think that's why Unhomework really came to my passion. So for me, it's about making sure that everybody in the whole of the building lives, breathes and understands the all-encompassing nature of what curriculum could be, and finding those moments of magic and then allowing the children to grow and to develop their own interests, as well as all the things that we have to do. And it's sort of a double-barreled thing of make sure you can cover your backs so you can do what you need to do, but also make sure that you can sleep at night by doing what you want to do.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the idea of cover your back and sleep at night. It's this, yeah, we've got to do the certain things that we have to do because of it's forces outside of our control, but we might not agree with, but we have to do it anyway, whether it's SATs or Ofsted or whatever, but do it in such a way that you feel your conscience is clear at night as much as possible. So you can have a sound night's sleep knowing you're doing it right. And this, we're not in independent thinking, we're not here to say, do it our way. We're not here to say, here's a model that you have to follow. Here's a load of, here's 50 PowerPoints and a curriculum that you can download. Independent thinking is about thinking for yourself and applying these ideas and interpreting them and doing it in a way that you feel is right with your values and your ethos and your beliefs, and just helping people see, and the phrase that we keep coming back to, that there's another way. People say you have to do it like that, okay, but here are people doing it in this sort of way. And there are certain associates within independent thinking who I refer to as our lighthouse associates, because they help me navigate independent thinking through it all, because they're practitioners who are in the classroom doing it and doing it differently and doing it well. And Mark is one, definitely. And Jonathan is one as well. Jonathan Lear. This is his second book. Though I'm not sure on my screen whether it's reversed or just my eyes. I don't know. Yeah, okay. So the monkey proof box, which was a follow-up to the popular Guerrilla curriculum. So, Jonathan, what's that all about? What are you doing now? What's your day job, and what's curriculum mean to you?
Right. Well, my day job is deputy head. I'm deputy head of a large inner city primary school in the middle of Sheffield called St Catherine's. And it's a school that I've been at for 22 years now, I think. So I went as an NQT and I've just kind of stayed and then fell into a leadership position. But to be honest, I'm a teacher. I've spent the vast majority of my time there being a class teacher. In terms of curriculum, this is something that, again, it forms the first part of my book, The Monkey Proof Box, really, because I think it's massively important. But really, I think curriculum is just the enactment of your purpose, the purpose of education. And I think certainly in the current climate where you've got the kind of encouragement to be thinking about those kind of 3 I's that Ofsted have invented, intent, impact, and implementation. There's that temptation to kind of begin the whole curriculum process with the first I, the intent, which is really just the body of your curriculum. And it kind of skips the bit about why we're doing it in the first place. What is it we want for our kids in the broadest possible sense? And for me, that's where curriculum starts. We have those conversations and we collectively talk about the fact that we want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to know that they're loved. We want them to be articulate, to be passionate, to be collaborators, to be reflective, all of those things, to be creative thinkers. And all of that comes before we get to the stuff around curriculum schemes and things, which is your Ofsted intent. So that's, for me, where, like I say, curriculum sits. It's in those conversations around our purpose, our collective purpose.
Okay. This idea of thinking about purpose, and it brings us then to the question of what's education for? What is it we're asking it to do? And without those sorts of conversations, it becomes education is a thing that is about grades and qualifications. Therefore, teaching needs to be about grades and qualifications. I saw somebody's Twitter profile last week, and I didn't respond on Twitter because I hate these bundles. It's not worth it. But what it really made me think, and they were just saying in their profile, learning is about memorizing. So memorize it and repeat. Job done. And I felt uncomfortable with that. And then I was thinking, well, maybe that is learning. Learning is just memory. And then I tweeted out a couple of days ago, people seem to quite like this idea that if learning is just about memory, then education needs to be about a whole lot more than just learning. So it's to what extent are we doing things that are over and above remembering things, that is the experience that we want education to have, which then feeds into what do we want education to do? What's it for? What is an educated person? So maybe we can look at that with regard to curriculum. I know the breadth, Jonathan, of the skills that are being developed, as well as the knowledge in your children is immense, and the experiences that they have is immense compared to many people who complain about a narrow curriculum, whereas yours is far from it, but you also cover your back as well as the sleeping at night. So we'll come back to explore that. Next in my pile, Howell. So this is your book, the Ladybird book of the midlife crisis. I just wonder whether you can talk us through that.
And that's volume 1.
Oh, okay. All right.
I am just working my way through that.
But there was this one you did as well, which is lesser known, maybe.
It hasn't got as many pictures in that one. So
it's got more words.
Yeah.
Tell us about you, Howell.
A man in crisis often. I don't even know what house I'm in. Don't know where I am.
I don't recognise so many books. You normally got records behind you.
I know, it's not my house. I just woke up in earlier. It's really lovely listening to Mark and Jonathan talk about what they do, and they're like proper teachers then. And I was a proper teacher once, and yet I still identify as a teacher because I don't know how to do anything else. And the work I do myself, but I also do a lot with Deborah as well, working with schools, just really instigating conversations around curriculum for purpose, like Jonathan was saying, and a curriculum that perhaps resembles a mirror and a window. So when the children look at their curriculum, they can see themselves in it, but they can also see through it and see the world. And I learned that when I was working in Key Stage 3, and we realized our curriculum wasn't fit for purpose. And we needed to make a curriculum that the children could care about, be bothered about. And that's really fueled me ever since. And the Oops book was an articulation of that, really, as seen there by my assistant. Yeah, it was an articulation, really, of a teacher's journey into finding out more about what teaching is, and not really getting to the bottom of it. I think I'm still working it out, but I get to work it out now as I travel town to town, school to school, working in classrooms with children, on the carpets, in front of them, and so on. And I feel like, in answer to the question, what is the curriculum? It's the lifeblood, really, of a school. And it needs to have that weight attached to it. So it isn't just something that's printed, that's typed up and put on a website. It's something that is an expression of what this school community believes, wants, desires, and thinks is important. Okay, lovely. And you mentioned the term bothered, and we'll come back to that, because I know that the botherness is a thing that you are bothered about. It's a word that is increasingly creeping into the language of teachers around the country, but it's your word, it's your thing, and it's your next book. Is it? So we'll come back to that and understand that a little bit. And also the curriculum, you've talked before, I've heard you talk about, the hot and cold, and we can perhaps sort of come back and have a look at that as well. What's inspired, one of the things inspiring about your work, Howell, is that you work across all age ranges and including into special schools, and that you are, so while Jonathan and Mark are teachers doing it, that's their day job, you're still the traveling teacher. You're still going in and modeling it and showcasing it with teachers and rolling up your sleeves and getting on with it, which is really good to see. And a lot of that work you do with Debbie as well, another practitioner, but also someone who has thought long and hard, hence the doctor before her name, Dr. Deborah Kidd, about the nature of, not just curriculum, but just about the nature of teaching and learning and being and creativity. Her first book, Notes from the Front Line, was really a call to action at a point where we weren't quite sure where the Gove world was leading us, to say it doesn't have to be this way. And then the Moebius in the Classroom, which was from your thesis, was it's a really deep and intense look at what is involved in teaching. It's not an easy read, it's not a how-to book, but I really was keen to publish it because it really makes you think very, very deeply about what you're doing in the classroom or in a museum or wherever you are interacting with children. And then we came to, I'm skipping a joint one, I'll come back to that, this one, which has been really well received, Curriculum of Hope. Now, hope is something I've been talking about for years. In my book, that's the cover behind you, Essential Motivation in the Classroom, we talked about hope. For me, hope, it's better than the alternative. So to have a curriculum built around this idea of hope at a point where so many young people and teachers in many ways are feeling hopeless and disempowered and have no agency, I think is hugely important. I'm really pleased that we have this book with the illustrations by your talented son. So Debbie, just say what your day job is, and how you've worked globally, not just in the UK, and then what curriculum means for you, and then do that, and then maybe we can sort of start the more intense conversation with you when you talk about your different pillars and the C's, please.
Okay. My day job at the moment seems to involve sitting in my house, drinking tea, chatting to people through a screen. I have spent a bit of time in school because I did some volunteering in schools when they were struggling to put staff in front of children before Christmas. And that was great, seeing children face to face, even with restrictions and things. It was still a bit weird. But generally speaking, I've been sitting here, but normally, I'm all over the world. And I think originally what people wanted to hear about was the kind of conversations around how classrooms could be more engaging and how learning could be made to matter more. So making it matter is kind of what I've been really interested in. But then I started thinking a little bit more about sort of the bigger picture. And Jonathan's right in saying that the curriculum, is much bigger than anything in a national curriculum document. The national curriculum is a lowest common denominator of what curriculum should mean to a school. And what curriculum should mean to a school encompasses a whole broader range of experiences and attitudes and interactions and values that we want children to to practice in a kind of safe environment before they have to go out into the world and do it for real. And so there's a part of that. What does that bigger picture look like? And quite often then what I've encountered is schools with brilliant intentions, you know, around global development goals and sustainability and conservation and, you know, empathy and challenging inequalities in society. Just superb values and goals, but sometimes it can turn into a bit of a curriculum of trauma if we're not careful. So we can take children through this unit, children, is all about animals that are becoming extinct, and then the next unit is all about pollution and climate change, and the next unit, you know, and we've got to be really careful. So Curriculum of Hope has partly at its heart this concept of active compassion, and placing children in an education system where their curriculum has value in the present time. It's not just preparation for the future. And in that present time, it's focused on agency and empowerment of children so that they believe that not only have they got the power to go out there and change the world rather than just know what it is as it currently exists, but they've had some opportunity to practice those changes. So within those pillars, there are things around community and authentic, real lived experiences that children have within that community.
Lovely. Yeah, I like that. That it can be, we're going to focus on poor people and poverty and charity and dying animals, and it without hope, we are entirely lost. And an agency, this idea that things, for me, the definition of hope that I've always referred to is things can get better and I can do something about it. If it's just things can get better, then that's not good enough. Because agency it works two ways as well. One, you've got to be given it, especially in schools where so much is controlled. I remember working with some primary schools a while back, and we were talking about how to get children to be more responsible. And we're saying, well, why don't we put posters up around the school that says, what are you going to do about it? So if you don't like something, if you don't like wet playtime, or if you don't like the lunches, or if you don't like whatever, what are you going to do about it? Not it's all down to you, but we're showing you that you have to take some element of responsibility for the things that you want to change in your life. So part of it is being given, and then part of it is taking it as well. Responsible, the ability to respond is what we're talking about. So, and the work, some of the research we did for the book, The Working Class, which I think you all contributed to. One of the bits of research came from Diane Ray, I think at Cambridge University. She was saying how so many young white males in English secondary schools just felt they had no control, no agency, no power, no responsibility. And that was one of the things that was at the root cause of their just not bothering, not trying, because nothing to do with me. I've got nothing, I have no power here. So I like that. Can you, I want to explore the 5 pillars, Debbie, the 5 C's, but I just want to go back to Jonathan and throw this contentious line that he shared with us about a year ago, or nearly a year ago, which I've shared with a few people since, because I think it's really important. And I just want Jonathan to justify it, and then maybe backed up or dismissed by anybody else on the panel. So this idea, Jonathan, that you said that if you've got to change your curriculum for the pandemic, then it wasn't the right curriculum in the first place. Can you just explain that just a little bit more? And that will feed in to Mark quite nicely as well, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the first instance, it was a statement I made because I was a little bit irritated by some stuff I was coming across on Twitter and what have you. And this was at the point at which we were kind of heading back after the first big lockdown and what have you. So we were getting the kids ready to come back to school. And there seemed to be this real kind of notion from people that just kind of making statements like it's really important when we get the kids back into school that we make sure that their well-being is central to what we're doing. And it just struck me that if that's a conversation you're having to have, if that's a meeting you are having to have in your school, then what the chuff were you doing before? Do you know what I mean? What was your curriculum about if the kids' well-being wasn't already central? So that was the first instance, I suppose. There shouldn't need to be changes in terms of how we look after our kids, how we build their self-esteem, how we look after them emotionally, I suppose. So that was one
priorities.
aspect.
The priorities were, what were the priorities before if it wasn't children and feeling good and feeling positive and learning at the heart
absolutely.
of it?
So there was that. And then I suppose the other element was more to do with the the technical aspects of curriculum design, I suppose, and the fact that this kind of sense of panic around loss of learning and what have you, and partly that was, I think, again, I'm coming from a primary perspective here because I have a different take on secondary, just because both my daughters are in secondary, and they're experiencing a curriculum that's made up of huge amounts of propositional knowledge, having to remember loads of stuff. And I think if you've lost big chunks of that, then that's a struggle, because you've got to have it in your head for these GCSEs. That's just the way the courses are designed. But from a primary perspective, actually, we operate differently, or at least we should do. So an effective curriculum's got to be vertically integrated. You've got to have that progression through school, I suppose. And really, that vertical integration has got to be focused on procedural knowledge, the stuff that previously in the olden days we might have called skills, the skills of a historian, the skills of a geographer. Our year one kids, they should be learning how to deal with historical sources, but they'll also be learning how to deal with historical sources in year 2 and in year 3, all the way up to year 6, just with increasing complexity. And so actually, when you take that longer arc in terms of looking at learning across a school, across a primary school experience, then actually those ideas of this panic over loss can kind of fades into the background a little bit. These kids are experiencing, or should be experiencing, a highly repetitious curriculum, not in terms of the context for their learning, but in terms of the stuff that underpins it. And again, if that isn't the case, then I think, schools do need to be looking at the way in which curriculum is structured. Vertical integration shouldn't be attached to propositional knowledge. And in fact, really, the only way of achieving that in a primary school would be to insist that in history, for example, every single year group studied the Romans, and they just learned more stuff about the Romans in every year. We don't operate like that. Like I say, if it's attached to procedural knowledge, then we are building the ability of those children to look at the world as a historian, to look at the world as a geographer, as an artist, through the eyes of a musician or a designer. And that is something that can be incrementally built. But if your view on learning is incredibly short term, what's going to be remembered in this particular year group or this particular term, then I can understand the panic, but it shouldn't be like that.
No. Okay. No, that makes sense. Mark, how does that resonate with your work? Your teaching, remind me, is it year 3 at the moment?
No, year 5. Year 3.
Year 5. It was year 3. Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that resonate with because you and Jonathan, you it's not like you sort of share notes or anything. You come at things from a different way. It's not like you read in the same hymn sheet, but there are clearly resonances there. What does that? What Jonathan said? How does that resonate with you?
Absolutely, and I totally agree with Jonathan. I think one of the dangers we've got is because the whole idea of knowledge, and Ofsted have got it in their statement, and people say, well, the only way that you've got that idea of knowledge is what the children can recall. And actually, if they're not able to tell you this fact that they did last year, actually becomes a real issue, and they sit down where they clearly didn't learn. They ignore everything else that they got around it. Funny enough, when I went to the school and redesigned the curriculum, and been lucky to have Deborah and Hal come into the school and done some work with the children, and I know you've done some work during the last lockdown, the first lockdown, Ian, and so you've seen it. But the idea was we needed a vision for the curriculum, and what did we want? And the statement was, we want our children to be historians and geographers, and by saying that's what we wanted, we were able to unpick it. Now, that's not without danger, and that's not without problem. And just a small anecdote from this week, we're looking in the run up to Easter, as is the curriculum already, for about the story of Jesus and what happened with him. And one of my parents saw me this evening, and I was dismissing the children, to say, I love what you're doing with the children, but I do have an issue as a Christian that my daughter came home and said, you do realise historically the Bible isn't a reliable source because it was written so long after the events of Jesus' death. And so, and actually to me, and I was delighted. I was like, that's a child living as a historian that's gone home and actually had a conversation. But I thought, for a year 5, what a conversation to have with a parent. Now, we didn't, we were talking, and the children were able to look at it, and that was the angle we were taking. How do we know where is it coming from? But that, to me, embodied everything.
So sending the Richard Dawkins book as the reader for the weekend, that didn't go down so well then?
No, not at all. But that, to me, embodies that if you've got a child that's prepared to actually have a conversation, with their parents about, so rather than just, oh, what did you do at school today? Oh, we're doing about the Easter story and looking at why did Jesus die from the sacrifice angle, being prepared to take it that step further. And they're the skills that we want. And it goes back to what Deborah was saying as well. If the children can't interrogate what they're seeing, that, you know, why do so many people suffer with the whole fake news phenomenon and the deep fake technology that's coming out? That's what we need to be addressing. And there is that bit of what's going on now, but future proofing them with those skills around it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, independent thinking, getting kids to think for themselves, which is so many ways right at the heart of what we're trying to do, isn't without its issues, whether that's with parents or with governments or whoever. But ultimately, what's the alternative? I use the phrase about we need to be throwing children out of the cave we're in. We're of a certain age, and this is how the world is for us. And we can't really see how it might be differently, because our mental models are quite sort of set as this is how it is. So if we prepare young people for that world, we're preparing young people for our world. What we've got to do is chuck them out of the cave that we're in into a world that we'll never see. We don't know what it's going to be like, but we need our bit is to prepare them for that. And if it's not getting them to think for themselves and question critically, and you can still have a belief, and religion is about beliefs. It's not about facts. It is about belief. That's why now it defines itself in many ways. Then the two are allowed to stand up. Reading a brilliant book called The Human Cosmos recently, which I recommend. You could get rid of most of your science curriculum and your RE and your PSHE and your art curriculum and just work through this book. It's absolutely brilliant. And just for millennia, there's been that balance between the sort of the science and the religion, and how we've sort of tried to bring them both together. And many people have succeeded in bringing them both together. But thinking for ourselves has got to be right at the heart of it, which is why I like all the work that you are doing around the curriculum, around putting the child's cognitive development, not just learning, not just memory, but the child's cognitive development, the ability to fail, to get things wrong. We'll talk about desirable difficulty in just a little while, is so important in the work that you're doing. Let's just hold that thought there in terms of the practical stuff that you're doing, and let's just sort of just helicopter above it just a little bit with Debbie, with your 5 C's and how that fits in with what you've heard so far and what you've seen in Mark's school. And I'll be interested as well from Debbie and Howell, what you were doing in Mark's school and what that looked like and what impact that it had. But take us through the C's of the curriculum of hope, Debbie.
I guess the C's came about from me thinking, what is it that I hold as key principles to my work? And then happily they all fell into a nice alliterative little pattern. But, I came to that word coherence, and not just because it was in the Ofsted documentation, but I was hearing it resonating a lot around, conversations in education. And it seemed to me that most of those conversations were really about progression of the kinds of knowledge that Jonathan was talking about, that he sees his daughters experiencing in school. And I was thinking coherence needs to be a lot more than that. It needs to be conceptual coherence, ideas that echo across the curriculum, that echo across phases of education. So I wanted to do some work around that, and how big ideas, grand narratives and concepts can form a structural coherence to work that goes well beyond, a chronology in history. I mean, I really loved what Jonathan said there about the sort of procedural knowledge around being a historian, because if you plan some aspects of your curriculum around that kind of procedural knowledge, it gives you flexibility to respond to current situations. So I was just planning a unit of work with some Year 4 teachers this week, and they were saying we really want our children to engage with what's happened, the process, this idea of what's happened with COVID, and how are we going to sort of remember it in the future. And I said, well, what would you be normally teaching at this point? And they would normally be doing some historical unit, but really what they were looking at with the children was what is a valid historical source, and how do historians curate and collect these sources to form a big picture of an event. So I said, well, you can still teach that, because what we could do with the children is process, how did COVID change the world, and how will historians present these days back to us in the future? So that's what the children are doing, and they're collecting eyewitness statements, they're collecting artifacts, they're collecting data, they're collecting quotes from key politicians, and they're going to exhibit all this stuff, hopefully face to face, but it might have to be an online exhibition. We'll have to see what happens. But I think even more crucially, what's lovely about the end of that project is they're going to pack it away and create a time capsule to hand to their own grandchildren in the future of the thing they've collected. So they're still learning what it's like to be a historian, and they're still looking at the sources, but there's that coherence of being able to conceptually think and then respond in time. And then the next one, I think I was being a bit defensive about, because I think I should have called it content rather than credibility, but I think I'd got sucked into too many Twitter arguments and I'd got a bit defensive.
That's not like you, Debbie.
No, I know, it's very out of character. But that's the knowledge, isn't it? That's the kind of, here's the stuff that we know that we want them to know, and let's make sure that's secure, let's make sure it's tied down, let's make sure we don't overload our curriculum with that, because we will be held accountable to it. So less is more in greater depth. And then the last three, I suppose, are the ones that resonate with the most. There's the compassion, and I think that's about not just the active compassion that I mentioned earlier, but it's also about curriculum being compassionate towards children. Again, it goes back to that, what Jonathan was saying of what the chuff are you doing if you haven't already been doing well-being in your curriculum. But it's things like, why would you take children out of art and sports activities to give them extra interventions in maths and English when you know that art and sports activities are good for their mental health? So it's thinking through the planning of your curriculum in a way that keeps the child at the heart of it. And then creativity, for me, is not about sort of, we're doing the Romans, so we'll make a mosaic. It's much more than that. It's about fluency of ideas, being able to apply something from an unfamiliar context and place it in a familiar one, and vice versa, taking something from a familiar context and doing something new with it. And to do that, we've got to put children into different kinds of thinking spaces and different kinds of situations where they're having to practice difficulty. They're wading knee deep through problems and dilemmas and difficulties in order to reach those creative solutions. And then finally, community, I think, is really about that sort of establishing networks. So it goes beyond cultural capital and museums and galleries and theatres, although they are really important. But it's about establishing networks within the community where the children have the opportunity to learn from experts who are out there. So just to give you a really brief example, year 2, redesigning a house for a baker who happened to burn down London in 1666. They're redesigning his house, but they're not going to present their ideas to me. They're going to present them to an architect and a fire officer, because they're the people with the expert knowledge to really critique it properly. So it's about building those connections, whether that's in secondary, where you might be then thinking about careers connections and those kinds of networks, and where are these children going to turn to in the future when they want some work experience or an internship, those kinds of networks. But at primary level, it's also getting primary children to recognise that within their own communities there are a whole host of people who are interested in what they've got to say.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it's this, the C's are, I've got it here: coherence, credibility, creativity, compassion, and community. It just really simply brings it together to interrogate what you're doing as a curriculum. And I see, even though this book was written after Jonathan's developed his curriculum and all the work that Mark's been doing, but the two overlap really nicely. You're just ticking all the right boxes. A bit like we said in the email conversation earlier, Jonathan, about the Sustainable Development Goals. You don't overtly have them as a focus, but the work that you do just happens to hit those buttons anyway, because it's good work. What comes through from all three of you is this making it real and keeping it real and having real, genuine experiences and real, genuine people. And there's a list in the Working Class book, and also in your Monkey Proof Box book, Jonathan, about the, by the time the kids have left year 5, they've worked as an architect, as an engineer, as a slipper maker. The whole list of things are there. It's real, genuine experiences. Linked to that, though, I'm going to come to Howell. Howell, let's say you're an internationally renowned educational speaker. How do you create the impression and the emotion? Oh, and by the way, I meant to say earlier, Q&A. Some people have gone into the Q&A feel free to put some questions in there, and we'll either field them, people will tap away and answer them, or we'll field them openly for everybody. So please use the Q&A. Nina's in the chat box, she's interacting with you there, but the Q&A is there for us to respond to. How will you create, and I know this is part of your work with Debbie as well, and this book, Uncharted Territories, with more illustrations by your son, is a beautiful way of looking at this idea about how can we create what are effectively and emotionally and cognitively real life situations, dilemmas, challenges, but from the point of view of, we're just in a classroom with some paper and pen, so let's say, how do you do that, and how does that lead to botheredness, Howell?
I think it's, I mean, it's just brilliant just listening to Debbie and Mark and Jonathan talking about the stuff that they do. And I know, I mean, the stuff I do with Debbie is there's a lot of close-knitness to it, if you like. But for me, and a lot of this I learned when I was full-time secondary, just being in classrooms with children who were passive, in secondary rooms. Children were passive. Literally, they would sit there and go, just don't be flash. Don't be flash. Just tell us what we need to know and we'll be fine with it, you know. And it's sort of, you could either choose to be deprofessionalized and go, okay, then, right, I'll just give you a load of sheets. I mean, that was pre-Twinkle. But now I think I didn't want to be that teacher. And I wanted to be a bit more than that. And working with Deborah, working with other great colleagues, and then branching out into special setting, particularly just the time I spent working in an SEMH setting as just a consultant teacher. So I was going into class, but I was also sitting with the teachers and the support teachers, and all the conversations were about, well, how do we get the kids to care about what they're learning? How do we get them interested? How do we? And it was the same, and it's the same conversation that we have as teachers probably every day in a staff room, if we've still got staff rooms. We chat about how do we make that less dull. And one thing that well, there's three elements really to this idea of botheredness. And the first is using contexts like all of us have talked about. And I've really honed all this working with Deborah, really, and feeding off her brain and thinking about the narrative, the tale that can be told in order to deliver and, if you like, uncover the knowledge. We need to know stuff in order to solve the dilemma. We need people. We need a place where something is happening, and we need a problem to resolve, a dilemma, as Deborah talked about. And if you get that people, place and problem, it just opens up loads of possibilities. Something I've been lucky enough to do in lockdown. Once lockdown hit, that first lockdown was quite hard because obviously all the schools closed up and everything closed down. And so my diary just became an open book. So I had my summer holiday in March in lockdown. But something that emerged was schools reaching out and saying, we need our kids to speak with confidence. Our kids are already disadvantaged. We need them to be enabled, if you like, to contribute, to feel a sense of pride in their own spirit. How can our curriculum do that? And my response to that is we need them to be really confident inside the curriculum you're putting together. So what I've done with those schools is we have the should curriculum, as I call it, the non-negotiables, the national curriculum, the stuff you've got to teach to sleep well at night, to pick up on that. We've got that. But then we've got this could curriculum. And this is the school identity. And what these schools have asked us to do is we're doing that. That's all written up in a knowledge organizer, although we didn't know what that were really. It was just a load of facts. And then we've got this bit, which is just this is how we want to do it. This is the vehicle, you know. And Debbie has just given you some great examples of using history, you know, how it can support history. We've got this task to do. Let's get these. Let's get let's use these sources. Let's create the sources, but let's go and find the real historical sources. Let's get experts in to check it. I've been writing one today for them for the history thing. It's for some schools in Leeds and Barnsley. So they're focusing on local history. So it's coal mining. So we've gone into mining memorials and mining disasters and so on. And there's a lot in there. And so the kids are going to be set up as basically people responsible for turning some waste ground, which used to be something to do with the pit, turning that into a memorial garden. So that's how we've got the should curriculum, which is local history. And this is going to be how we do it. And we're going to use story. But in order for that to work, so stories is part of it. The second element is the stance. It's how we are as teachers with our kids. And it's really quite difficult, I think, this, because it's not critical of anyone. It's saying, what's it like to be taught by you? And how are you going to sell this stuff, metaphorically, to the children in your room, some of whom who might not have a bed? Some of whom who have no significant adult in their life who they look up to. You might be it. So how are you going to sell mining memorials to them? And that takes a bit of looking in the mirror for the teacher, I think. And it requires, it is the basis of some CPD, I think. And that's certainly what, certainly in our joint work, Deborah and I do a lot of that. We're going in and we're saying, this is what you could do. These are the possibilities. But there's got to be some investment. That person you mentioned on Twitter with that Twitter handle, you'd have to like sit them down and show them and like say, look, there is another way. There is that other way. But not everyone's got to teach the same. And that humanity, that stance, that persona, it's got to be something that we embrace, if you like, in ourselves. Professional imagination is probably what I'm talking about. That ability to look at a dry document that's full of curriculum guidance and say, I'm going to make this buzzing. I'm going to sort this because I know my kids in my room. I can't go and download the guidance that's going to help me with my kids. I've got my kids and I love the kids I've got because there's nothing else you can do. So I'm going to create something for them. And sorry, just the final thing is, if you like, the how are we doing it? Now, I'm a big fan of teaching at the front, teaching from the front, telling kids stuff. I am actually really all right with that, as long as there's other stuff as well. As long as there's other stuff going on. I love that moment in a classroom where the teacher, you can see there's a shift, and I see it in great primary classrooms. I've seen so many brilliant teachers, they just do it naturally, where they go from delivering to actually just being with the kids in some sort of, I think they call it a joint productive activity, where they've just shifted side by side. You see early years teachers do it all the time. I see Swales is there. You see, they do it a lot, but we should be doing that in secondary. Just that shift of stance, that finding the metaphorical middle ground where we step in it, and it's not just the kids getting knee deep in it. We're getting knee deep in it as well, with a couple of pens and a few post-it notes, and just a really good context that's hooked them in.
You're breaking the fourth wall. That's the theatrical way of looking at it, isn't it? You're moving from here to there, and it changes things in the classroom. It really galvanizes them. But what comes across, Howell, passionately, is that botheredness is not only working in such a way that the children become bothered about their work and they move from engaged to invested, and we can perhaps come back to Mantled Expert and Dorothy Heathcote at some point, but I'm doing it because I have to, I'm doing it because it's on the test, to actually quite like it, to I don't want to go for break, I want to get this done. And that resonate with a lot of your work as well, Mark, from what I've heard of that. So it's getting kids, getting young people, getting children bothered about what they're learning, but also that the adult in the room is incredibly bothered to do more than just deliver the curriculum, because that's what they'll get paid to do at the end of the day anyway. So there's that moral, ethical, higher calling than just
We lost
to
Ian for a second.
the Jonathan stuff, but there's a question from Catherine, which I want to bounce to Mark, because I think he might be the best one to answer it. It was mixed age classes. The Jonathan might have a view as well. We currently have R and 1 together, 2 and 3 together, 4, 5, 6 together. Challenging it is to ensure coverage, but also address the skills. Mark, do you have any thought on this mixed age classes and probably whether it's a small primary school or one that's just been affected by the way the bubbles have worked out?
Yeah, I mean, I've not taught, I'll say for a start, I've not taught in mixed ages, so it's not something I've got an experience of. But for me, I think it goes back to everything that Jonathan and I were saying earlier about knowing where you're going and actually having that vision. So if you've actually got that, it then becomes easier to deliver. And I've done some work with colleagues that work in mixed age schools, and what I found with them is if they've got that clear vision and they then can know what they can actually do, and they've got that permission. I saw another question come up interestingly, and I think that's it. You know, it's that, have they got the permission to do things? And if you actually have that overarching view of this is what our curriculum for our school is, this is what our children need, it becomes an awful lot easier to deliver, because it isn't about, you know, the mistake I think that colleagues can sometimes make is, right, I've got a 3-4 class, for example, or 2-3 class, so therefore I've got to give the year 2 some work and some year 3 some work. But if you have that level of progression, I mean, we have mapped it out because we've got quite a lot of inexperienced teachers at our school, but it actually is there. This is the progression all the way through, so people can see exactly where the children are going. And it does allow then, in a mixed age class, I know, those that are more able and more interested and able to take on more, they've got that there for them. But you're giving them those experiences, and you can do the work that Deborah and Harold talked about having that idea that's going to drive your curriculum, and Uncharted Territories is perfect for this. And you have that, but then they can develop it in their own ways and making sure they have got the skills and the coverage comes with it. And it's trusting that that's what happens, rather than thinking, oh, I've got 2 ages, and when they come in, I've got to have, I don't know, the year 2s are doing the Greeks and the year 3s are doing the Romans because we're both doing history. That's the wrong way to go. Actually deliver it so it is unifying. And it becomes ultimately like your ultimate mixed ability class. Mm. You would have that for, you know, in a normal mixed ability class. If you walked into, you know, and come into my class, I teach year 5, but I've got children that are working at year 2 level. I've also got children that are desperate to take the 11 plus ready for grammar school, because that's where they are. It's no different in a mixed age class, just making sure that you know where it is. And as a teacher, know where you're going, and know that the leaders around you are supportive of that.
So you used the word trust, Mark, and that was a word that came up. You wrote a blog for us a while back about an unhomework project that you did through the most recent lockdown. And I can imagine that by saying, okay, I'm trusting you, here's what we're going to do, how you do it is up to you, that children then will find their own level with that. And you've got the year 2s will do it their way and the year 3s will do it their way, even though the task is the same. Just briefly, you're able just to describe that. And Nina might find the blog post for it. I think it's the most recent one from Mark in the resources page, Nina. What was an unhomework project, and how did it work in that differentiated way? Self-differentiated.
Yeah, so the idea was it draws from the Google Genius Hour, and so I just set the children the project. I realised that yes, there was lots of things we needed to do, and we continued the curriculum, and I continued teaching what we were expecting to deliver, but I wanted them to have something else. The whole idea of being at home and having an opportunity, I wanted to give it to them. So I said to them, right, you've got 4 weeks, because it was the run up to, it was going to lead us into half term when everyone was hoping they'd go back. And I said, you can do any topic you want, and you can present it in any way you want. And I gave them some support, so be able to time scale it, because I knew that for some of them that wouldn't help. That would be a big help, because they're year 5, so they're not going to be able to work to a deadline. And I wanted to avoid that last minute Thursday before half term, let's do something. And really the instructions were, you can do whatever you want, you can present it how you want. And all I'm asking for is something that tells me more about you, because it's got to be your interest. And I want to see 4 weeks worth of effort from a year 5. And I got questions, and they were emailing me, can you have a look at this? Can you maybe recommend a website for this? Which was actually quite difficult, given the fact that some of the things they were choosing were things I had absolutely no idea about. And if you look at the blog, you'll see, when you've got a child that's telling you, that's doing their project all about gastro reflux, so I had absolutely no idea. But because of the fact that and the reason they chose it was because of the fact that they suffered it when a few years ago, and so but they never really understood it, so they went away to do that. I had somebody else do the Hillsborough disaster, because he's a Liverpool fan and he's heard about it, but he didn't know really enough about it, so he spent his 4 weeks looking at that. And it wasn't all PowerPoint slides. I had children going away and making models. I had children doing videos. I had children actually doing animations. I had someone that did it about Harry Potter, and he actually set up his house as all different rooms and actually took you around. And he was playing the music as he was going from room to room. Saying in this room, and he was explaining everything, and that was something that within school he's not able to do, because obviously he has to write, but he had to write to get the script to do it perfectly, so when he actually had it and went through, when he even wrote his brother in to doing things, and you had children doing things. One of my boys, because we were looking at the Greeks, loved the ideas of the Greeks legends, so he created a Greek legends through Lego, and he did a stop frame animation using Lego. And that just gives you an idea of what I think you can do, and it gives you that possibility.
I love that. It's sort of this structured freedom, isn't it? You're not saying do whatever you like. You're setting the structure, this idea that I expect it to be of a year 5 level, which is what you sort of reiterated with them on an ongoing. So this sense of responsibility they had to do right, to be as old as and to work at the level of the age that they were at, is, you can see how powerful that would be. I've always found that even with the most difficult groups, you get control by giving it. The more you try and exert control, the more of a battle it becomes. They'll always find a way to subvert it. But by giving them the control, without losing your overall parameters, but by giving them a feeling of control, you just get a lot more out of them, even your most challenging kids. That's from my experience. Jonathan, we've heard about sort of real life stuff. We've heard about the dilemma, and being knee deep in dilemma, and the idea that you need to create this sense of something needs to be put right. How does that tie in with your work around desirable difficulty, which is a phrase I hadn't heard before until I heard you talking about it, but I love it. And I love how you do it, the mud garden and all of that sort of stuff. So can you just explain desirable difficulty and how that fits in with this real life dilemma stuff, please?
Yeah, really, it comes from the work of a cognitive psychologist, Robert Bjork, who first coined the term desirable difficulties. And we are, personally, I am very, very interested in research. I would describe us as a school as being research informed. We're not blindly led by it at all. We use our intuition, our feelings about things as well, and we just try stuff out. But Bjork's work is really, really interesting. And Bjork is coming at it from a perspective of learning, of being able to retain learning better. And what lots of his research demonstrated was that, again, and for me as a teacher, this was a bit of a moment, because it was kind of counterintuitive. I've gone through the vast majority of my career believing that I should be making children's lives easier. If you've been brought up with that kind of Ofsted mantra of rapid and sustained progress and that kind of thing, and having to demonstrate progress within a lesson, which is 60 minutes long, all of which we know to be nonsense. But as a young teacher, I bought into that because I wanted my outstanding badge. And so you do it and you rattle through stuff. The last thing you want to do, if you're in that kind of situation, feeling that kind of pressure, is actually put barriers in the way. If you need to get from A to B on the path of least resistance. I've got a lot of stuff to cover. I spent most of my career as a year 6 teacher. I got relegated from year 1 but up to year 6. And like I say, for about 15 years, I was a year 6 teacher. So that pressure of preparing kids for SATs and getting through curriculum, it makes you remove barriers, remove difficulty. And that's why his work kind of stood out. I was quite interested in the idea that maybe the opposite is true. And he identified a certain particular desirable difficulties. So he looked at, Bjork's work was around things like spacing, interleaving, the idea of generation, Perceptual difficulties was another kind of interesting, but not a massively useful one. But it was interesting again because it was counterintuitive. Visual disfluency, that was around. Texts that are more difficult to read lead to greater processing strategies and therefore greater remembering. And again, it was the opposite of what I'd been taught as a teacher, if you like. And that led to just a more general exploration of what impact difficulties have, creating this kind of, like I say, creating moments where children are just very deliberately being put up against it, where you're throwing that kind of spanner in the works. And first of all, it was the foundation stage children that we'd kind of experimented with, just because we viewed the 4-year-olds as the most resilient learners in the entire school, far more so than the year 6s, more independent, more resilient, generally more creative, which says something about what happens as they're progressing through. So we went to the 4-year-olds and we just experimented with various layers of desirable difficulties, just giving them a relatively straightforward task. And one example was the again, and I talk about this quite often, was the creation of mud pies for a banquet. So they were given a purpose, which was creating a banquet for a king, because this letter had arrived from the king, and he was in a spot of bother and what have you, and he had to create this banquet at short notice and needed the kids' help. And they were desperate to go out and help, and they knew they needed to make these mud-related dishes. But what we worked on was just then, rather than making it a very kind of straightforward A to B path for the children, there were various layers of desirable difficulties that was introduced at different stages. So one of the first things that happened was there was a decision made around the positioning of the tap for the mud kitchen. And any kind of early years practitioner will know that to make effective mud pies, you need mud and water. And we had the option of putting the tap in the mud kitchen, really close to the mud and really close to all of the pots and pans and utensils. And again, from a common sense perspective, that's the right place for it to go. You know, you're trying to replicate a real kitchen, let's make it straightforward, they can crack on with it. But actually, they decided to put the tap outside of the mud kitchen. And again, you can view that as being a desirable difficulty. Those children are having to consider or think about how to transport the water. So that was one layer. Another was the type of tap that was used, and deliberately deciding to use an awkward tap, a tap that would kind of force the children into some kind of like collaboration potentially, because it'd be dead hard to use on their own. And again, it's kind of counterintuitive. We normally consider making life easier, and yet there was another layer which made things harder. Beyond that, drilling holes in the bottom of the pans. So it was really difficult for them to transport water with the containers. And now we're kind of bordering on a kind of extreme now, pressure these kids are under. All they want to do is make a mud pie, but all these kind of series of barriers. But what we saw from those children was really quite incredible. The kind of thinking that those children produced, and it just never would have happened if it wasn't for those conditions. Without those conditions, the kids would have just got containers and made the mud pie, and it might have been done and dusted in 5 minutes. But this became an extended piece of learning that went on over days as the children experimented with different means of transporting water, first of all. I mean, in the first instance, just like using their hands and just running really fast. But then some children who did like amazing things, 4 years old, and some of them placed one container inside another and just rotated it to misalign the holes. They were finding things to block the holes. Again, the most extreme example in terms of creative thinking was children who realized that their hoods on their coats looked a bit like buckets, and so removed them and used them to carry the water. And it was really it was an incredible thing to witness, I suppose. The idea that these constraints had led to this exactly the kind of thinking that we want from all of our pupils. And so, yeah, that was where that work kind of developed from. I wouldn't say my take on desirable difficulties is the same as Bjork's. Like I say, I think he was very, very interested in retention of information. Whereas I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in the impact it can have on thinking. And again, I was reading just the other day, another independent thinking associate, Phil Beadle. He had waded gently into the great front adverbial debate and wrote a blog on it. But there was a great quote in there, which I just loved. And it was, creativity is the most elegant response to the constraints we're under. And I just think that's spot on that. That is kind of what happens. And again, I think it's a great question to ask as a practitioner, as a teacher in a classroom, to what extent am I removing those constraints for the children to get them through stuff? so I can tick things off and say I've covered content. And can that balance be redressed? Even if it's just a little bit, sometimes it's better than nothing. So yeah, it's, like I say, it's an interesting thought to have.
If you want a Twitter bundle, just talk about efficiency in education. I did a podcast for a guy called Dr. James Mannion a few weeks ago, which just came out yesterday. It's one of these long, I think Debbie's done one for him as well, haven't you? You have a conversation that's about 3 hours, which it's like a long read in a podcast, but it's quite nice. You can just take your time with things. And I talked about how efficiency is the enemy of education in many ways. To make it efficient, it means you take away failure, you take away effort, you take away frustration, you take all those things out of the way in order to then deliver the stuff as efficiently as possible. And I'd sort of said that, and then somebody tweeted to say a quote from Doug Lemov, Teach Like a Champion guy, that efficiency is a much underrated word in education, which resonated with something somebody had said a few years ago. You've got to have efficiency in education. I'm sure Nick Gibb in England would approve of that. But for me, it's the opposite of education. So then we're back to, what do we want education to do? And what is the process by which we educate our children? And I still think efficiency, maybe nearer exam time, you need the efficiency to get cover to pass the exam, because that's part of the game that we're playing. But if it's just about that, efficiency serves the teacher more than it does the learner, maybe. So I like this desirable difficulty, which then leads to the fact that a child can't peel their own banana. We'll see whether we finally get back to that or not, Jonathan. We tried to do that last summer, but I don't think we ever got to that one. Debbie, when you hear Jonathan talk about desirable difficulty and what the psychological torture that he put his kids through, which reminded me of that thing where they, where they had to stop the experiment with the prison guards. From a sort of I know you're a practitioner, but also from a sort of academic helicopter view, what are you observing in Jonathan's 4 or 5-year-olds when you see that sort of stuff that they're going through?
Well, they're being placed in a situation in which they're having to, when I mentioned creativity being about finding solutions, using familiar knowledge to find solutions to unfamiliar problems, that's exactly what they're having to do. They know that if they can't see a hole, then maybe the water won't go through. They know that if they put their hands together, they can carry sand and they can carry solid objects, so why not water? So they're creatively experimenting with the strands of knowledge they have and then finding new understandings and applying those. And it's just it's one of the best examples I've ever heard of how teachers can playfully do that. And early years teachers do that brilliantly. I think we've got a big problem in education in that we think everything has to go down. Here's the end point, we'll push everything down, and we don't build up from where the children are at. I was having, like, rolling around in my head when Jonathan was talking there, a memory of working with Year 3 children in a school in Oxford at St Ebbs. I write about it in more detail in the book, but that idea of bringing the expertise in from outside. The children created a replica of the cave network that they had discovered in their context, that had Stone Age paintings in it. So they'd recreated the paintings, they created this exhibition, they were taking their visitors through the exhibition. And one of the visitors was Professor Peter Thoneman from Oxford University, as a professor in ancient history. And he went through with the children, and he was asking them these detailed questions about their interpretations of the paintings. And he came out and he said at the end of it that he was astonished by what he called the children's comfort with epistemic uncertainty. And what he meant by epistemic uncertainty was that ability for the children to say, well, this picture could depict gods, or it could be a dream, or it could be a representation of life, but seen, in a kind of exaggerated way. We don't really know, but these are the things we've been thinking about. And he said he had, some of the brightest and the best undergraduates from around the world coming to study with him who couldn't cope with that level of uncertainty. And it was one of the big things he had to unteach. And I think we, in the same way that Jonathan says his most creative and knowledgeable children in some ways are in the early years, and we somehow destroy that as they're going through. I think we've got to be really careful about that, because yes, we have got to, children are going to secondary school and they are going to need a certain set of skills and aptitudes. But the thing they need more than anything else when they move into that Key Stage 3 environment is the capacity to think. And then Key Stage 3 really needs to respond to that in a way that it doesn't, especially respond to it at the moment.
It's such a wasted opportunity, Key Stage 3, and turning it into an extended Key Stage 4 just seems even more of a wasted opportunity in so many ways, especially when we're saying, well, then it becomes part of this education is just about how many qualifications you can get. So we've done our job if they're, and then you start, I was speaking to somebody from the world of business last week saying they don't really care about the qualifications. He was working for one of the big four accountancy consultancy companies. We'll take non-graduates, we just see what you've got. And as far as he's concerned, as long as you can, I don't know, host a meeting, be civil to people. And he says his 12-year-old daughter can do that. So, and he thinks maybe LinkedIn, that's going to be the future of it. If they get their algorithms right in terms of not only showing if it is qualifications there, but also the things that you've done. And you can throw in blockchain to that as well, if you'd like, to say this is definitely what I've done and nobody can take that away from me. Then suddenly the algorithm is, LinkedIn will decide whether you get the job, whether you get the interview or not whether you went to such and such a university. So the more we funnel education to being just about grades and qualifications, at a point where people are caring less about grades and qualifications anyway. And what I said to this guy, it's a blog I wrote years ago, is, the world of business could help transform education simply by just asking the question of every interviewee coming in who shows their qualification, say, okay, that's great. What else have you got? By asking that, what else have you got question, it means we have to give them an education where they do more, have got more to show. And whether that's extracurricular stuff or whether that's their ability to think for themselves, which has got to be right at the heart of an education system, I would suggest. But maybe in certain secondary schools, having kids think for themselves is going to get them into trouble. There's that sort of wider debate as well, but we'll save that for a Twitter bundle at some point. So thank you, Debbie, for that. And what was that phrase? Epistemic
uncertainty.
Epistemic. I think it's F. Scott Fitzgerald said intelligence is the ability to hold two conflicting points of view at the same time and still function. And I see with the philosophy for children, with the thunks, it's the academic kids who want to know what the answer is. They want to settle for this. Tell me what the answer is. Whereas this idea that it could be yes, or it could be no, or it could be both yes and no, or neither yes nor no, seems okay with certain children. So I'm glad there's a word for that now. I'll make a note of that. Howell, hot and cold curriculums. How does that sort of resonate? Would you define what you see with Mark and Jonathan working in their primary schools as hot curriculum? And what is a hot curriculum compared to a cold curriculum?
I think it's about curriculum culture. And again, what feeds into that culture are the people, in the teachers, I guess, the adults, the teaching assistants and so on. I think what we've heard from Jonathan and Mark, we've got descriptions there of very, very warm curriculum. And it's that idea that, in Jonathan's school or in Mark's school, they might well be doing the Vikings, because they do the Vikings, don't they, in primary? They do it. And there could be a school down the road, and this is a story I tell a lot, but there could be a school down the road from Jonathan and Mark's school who are also doing the Vikings. But the difference there is it's a very cold delivery. That doesn't mean that anyone's bad or evil. It's not terrible in those schools. It's just that the delivery of the curriculum, the content of the curriculum around Vikings is just that. Right, we've got to do this, and let's make a shield and we'll cover art. We can tick that off because we've got to do more numbers because they can't add up. So, it's just because everything appears to be an add-on to what is perceived to be the core business. That's a cold curriculum. But like I say, the children in the cold school, if you lifted them up and dropped them into Jonathan or Mark's schools and plenty of other schools, you drop them in there and they'd be buzzing. They wouldn't be saying, I much prefer the pedagogical approach in this school. They wouldn't say that. They'd just, I think they'd be given more chance to achieve. And the curriculum, to pick up on what Deborah talks about, the curriculum's compassionate to them, whereas in the cold environment, it's just being done to them. And that is, just a lot of the time, I'll go back to someone called Martin Haberman, who talks about the pedagogy of poverty, and that's what that is. It's a curriculum that lacks richness. We're just doing school. We're just doing it. We're just getting it done with, and then you can try and get a job. But what we talk about, Deborah and I, in our work, is trying to get to a pedagogy of power, a pedagogy of richness. Similarly, a teacher, and I'm talking about real humans here who I've met, a teacher in the cold school, you could lift that teacher up and put them in a warm environment with a warm curriculum, a sort of big soup curriculum, you know, Heinz big soup, proper lovely with a crusty bread with butter melting in, not your cup of soup still in sachet curriculum. You could drop that teacher in and they would probably thrive, rather than be sitting in an environment thinking, I need to get out of here. I could go and retrain. I could go and do something else. And that's the pedagogy of poverty in those. And that's a cold curriculum. It's a cold curriculum culture.
And is it the cultural thing? That's what I was going to ask. Does that come from the head down, or can you have a head teacher that's, and some of the questions are about how do we get buy-in across the school? It might be that there's a teacher watching this who really wants to be hot in the classroom, but feels that they can't because of the culture, or maybe there are head teachers who really want this, but there are certain teachers who aren't getting more than a simmer on and are just like a pot noodle. Where does it all come from? How can it change?
It ends in a buffet. No, I think it's got to come, which you know, I think leaders, you know, it's no accident that when I love speaking at leadership conferences, because you know you've got the people there who can go in and decide that things are they can be the culture shifters. But having said that, I feel I was a teacher who was looking around thinking, I want to do it like this. I want to be like this, you know, teaching literature, English GCSE. I wanted to do things differently. And teaching Key Stage 3, I wanted to be, if you like, that warm teacher. I think it goes back to what I was saying before. It's about, it is about having permission, I guess. And if you're in a school where the leaders are just crushing you, then perhaps you're in the wrong place. If everything that we've talked about tonight, you're listening to it now thinking, I want that, but there's no way that's happening in my school, then perhaps you're in the wrong place. And perhaps you need to have a look around and see if there's somewhere else to go. I say this to my trainees and my NQTs who might find themselves a little bit despondent. You're not in the only school in the world. And if you feel that you cannot make the changes and the difference that you want to, or have the influence that you'd like to have, then do what I did and move on, or be that powerhouse, be that radiator amongst a load of drains.
Yeah. Okay. Go on, Debbie.
I was just thinking, because I got asked this question actually this week, and it was a head teacher who was trying to warm up this culture and was trying to give her teachers permission, and it was almost getting the response back from teachers of, well, all right then, but I don't know how to do it. So she was saying, will you come and show us how to do it? And I said, I will, but even as we're sitting there planning, you or another senior leader needs to be present, because they will throw back at me, and I've seen it happen 100 times, they will throw back at me, we're not allowed to do that here. We're not allowed to, we have to do our marking in a certain way, we have to do this in a certain way. When you've got a senior leader going, do you know what, that's up for negotiation, we can change that, we can adapt this is the focus. And also the leaders heard the realities of some of the pressures that the teachers are under, then you start to get closer to some kind of shared understanding of what might be possible. But when it's a leader saying, will you come in and do this to my staff, it doesn't work. It has to be this kind of really collaborative and carefully thought through process, or else otherwise it just tends to fall apart in pockets across the school.
That makes sense. I think we're answering some of the questions, like from Helen, who her school went from outstanding to RI, brackets, EEK, close brackets, that's a big EEK. How do you get buy-in from the staff? What about promoting botheredness? How do you support underconfident teachers who may find this approach challenging? So I think we're sort of touching on some of that. Howell, did you want to, I'm hiding you behind the Q&A box on my screen, but I can see you now.
All right, just that really, that lack of confidence in practice, that to me is where the CPD stuff kicks in. So look, you know, we it's independent thinking, we can go and do training events, we can do training days, and we do high quality stuff. And I love doing that stuff. I love presenting. I love doing that. But I think powerful CPD comes after that. So a model that, you know, that Deb and I use is we'll go in and do the training event, but then actually we'll go into class and we'll try and show, and we'll work with that teacher who lacks confidence perhaps, or the team. You know, I know we've had, you know, 12 adults in the room watching us teach year 4. And as we're walking in, someone says, good luck with them, you know, because there's an attitude in the school that our kids won't do this. So it's really powerful CPD for maybe a teacher who lacks confidence or has believed the vibe of our kids aren't into this sort of thing. So we're on a hide into nothing straight away. But to see it done and to see it happen, it's powerful. And then to sit down and talk about it, and sit down and unpick it, you know, as professional equals, you know, that's what we are. Yeah. It's about let's give the kids a good experience. Here's one way of doing that. Here's one way of warming the stuff up.
Thank you. So Jonathan, so you've been on the journey. You've been how many years did you say you've been at the school? 22.
22, I think.
Yeah. So you've been at that school since you were 8.
He went when he was 12.
Yeah, there you go. So you've it's not like you were brought into a school to change a culture, but you have worked through that school as its culture has transformed, and you're not even the head, you know, you're only the deputy. So how have you got buy-in from the staff? How have you built confidence? How have you faced resistance? And if you do, we've got a quarter of an hour to go, and I want to come to Mark at some point, because I want Mark to show how teachers can get their weekends and evenings back from another blog that you did for us a while back. So we'll perhaps come to that, Mark. But Jonathan, in terms of buy-in and confidence and bravery and permission and resistance.
Yeah, I think to begin with, for us, what was most important was getting to a point where we started having honest conversations with each other in school. Because again, I think that some of lots of the stuff that's been spoken about already, I wholeheartedly agree with, in terms of how to shift culture and stuff, and how to get staff on board. But sometimes you've got the head teacher or the leader there who has got this vision for what curriculum should be like. And then you can have a critical mass of staff who are actually quite happy with the way things have been done, because we've always done it that way. We've always been told we're a good school. We've always been told. And that, again, I think can be quite difficult to shift. So there has to be that moment where you're able to have that conversation. And that's what we did, that collective conversation where we spoke about the bits that weren't going that well. And that took quite a shift, really, because again, I grew up through the national strategies and the first literacy hour and the numeracy hour being introduced, and there was very much a culture in schools of just having to get on with the stuff you were told to do. And for a big chunk of my early career, I was really just keeping my head above water, trying to cling on with all of these strategies and everything that went with the national strategies. Really knowing that I wasn't doing my job anywhere near well enough. I wasn't keeping up with it all. And it got to the point where it was overwhelming. And it was only when I spoke to a colleague, a trusted, experienced colleague who I really looked up to, someone who could do everything and it just seemed effortless. And so I spoke to her about the problems I was having, and found out that actually she was in exactly the same boat. She felt completely overwhelmed by it. She felt that none of the stuff she was doing was really good enough, or it could be better. And then from those kind of conversations, we went and spoke to other teachers around school, until we got this kind of shared, kind of, like I say, this understanding that none of us were that satisfied with the way things were going. And then it became an awful lot easier. If anything, we went to the other extreme and we were talking about everything that was crap. And it was, you know, we swung the other way, but it was a good starting point, because in those honest conversations there, you've got the beginnings of buy-in to something better, something different. And we didn't know what that was going to be. We didn't know what it would look like, but we knew we wanted something. We knew that when we were describing the topics we were doing with our kids, we were only ever using words like it was nice, it was, you know, the kids enjoyed doing it, they produced some lovely work. That was the limit of our vocabulary. And we wanted to get to the point where we were talking about the kids producing incredible work, beautiful work. That was our aim. And like I say, we didn't know how to get there, but we worked on that, but we worked on it collectively. And so there was a large extent to which the development of our curriculum was done together. There were aspects of our curriculum that were stronger than others, some aspects that were weak, but it didn't fall down to individual subject leaders to sort it out. It wasn't about, let's have a staff meeting on art and get it all sorted and done and planned. We decided we'd dedicate an entire term, work across a term rather than a half term, and make the autumn term our history focus. And what that meant in terms of CPD was that we were all in it together. In the autumn term, all of us in school, we were thinking about history. And we developed our subject knowledge about history, our understanding of that subject domain. And then we moved on to another term where there was a different subject focus, and we did that together. So it was never left to one person to drag everybody else with them. It was always a collective. And we kept talking. We kept having those honest conversations all the way through, because there's always bits you're dissatisfied. Even now, and when we started at St. Catherine's, we were in a category. I don't remember what it was in the olden days, because we used to have like 4-day Ofsted inspections and stuff, not like these new quick in and out jobs. And it was like, but it was properly like below inadequate, something like that. We were really like rubbish, damaging to kids, I think it said, something like that. And it's taken us a long time to get to where we are now. And like I say, we're still not satisfied, but those conversations have been the biggest thing in terms of building that culture.
I like that the honest conversations that just to take, rather than this accusing it. When you go in the staff room and say, I had year 3 were awful, or they were fine for me, and let's just be honest, let's be open, let's admit our failings, let's celebrate our successes, and that's the starting point for real change, it seems. If people are interested, Jonathan's I talked about sort of the off-the-shelf curriculum where you just have 50 PowerPoints and some flip charts. Jonathan's guerrilla curriculum is he's done all the thinking behind it. So increasingly schools are coming to Jonathan and say, how can we take all that thinking stuff and apply it in our school and use that structure in our school? And that's something that schools are really interested in. So if anybody wants any more information about the guerrilla curriculum and how they can take it with Jonathan's support, either through Inset or through Zoom, then just let us know. Nina will put a link in the chat. My daughter did a placement because she was at Sheffield Hallam a couple of years ago. I did a placement at a really awful school. I think it reminded me, Howell, when you were talking, that was just, she was just there to mark the teacher's books. Every time she turned up, he disappeared out and left her to it. And the TA said, oh, you need to leave now. It's, it's past your time. And then she came to some work in Jonathan's school, and it was transformative, her understanding of education. And what is inspiring about Jonathan's school is it's not just Jonathan doing crazy stuff in Jonathan's classroom. That's all right with him. He's in year 6. It's across the school. It's embedded across the school in everything that they do. And I've seen that by my visits. And I know he used to do in the old world, visits to the school. People could come along and bring their school to go and do the visits. I'm sure you'll sort of do that again in the future. But it is embedded and it is school-wide. You mentioned the O word, and I'll mention the S word as well. What do Ofsted make of you now? And people are going to ask these questions, and how are the SATS results? And I'll ask the same question of you, Mark. So, but Jonathan first. So the O and the S words, how's it going?
So it's gone well. We were a school that were quite quickly got out of kind of special measures category when I first begun, and then we spent a long time at good because it was nigh and impossible for a school like ours in our context to be anything other than that. So we work in an incredibly deprived community, in the top 5% in terms of deprivation index nationally. And we've got an incredibly diverse community. It is amazing. It's a brilliant place to work. We've got 43 different languages spoken across school, just to give you kind of a sense of the community that we serve. We were most recently graded outstanding by Ofsted, and this was at a point at which they had become very, very interested in curriculum, and we'd taken some really quite brave decisions around curriculum in terms of how we were structuring it. Not just that, there's a whole load of other stuff that we don't really have time to talk about in terms of how we've worked on children's independence by looking at classroom environment and things like that. So there was a whole host of things that could be considered risky, but the report was glowing in terms of what our children are able to produce, the way in which they're able to articulate their curriculum and learning, the process of learning, incredibly confident, independent year 6 children, which is exactly the message we get off our secondaries. When they're talking about our kids on transition, they do transition into a very, very different kind of school, more so than most primaries because of the way our environment looks and things like that. But because our children are given responsibility, because we work really hard to build their independence, they go up and they cope with that transition far better than lots of other children. It's a real privilege to listen to our secondary colleagues just talk so positively about the way our kids adapt to what are very rigid classroom environments. But it's not a problem for our kids because, like I say, they've always been given that responsibility around their learning in terms of their resources and things like that. You know, they cope brilliantly.
And SAT results?
SAT results are really, really good. Are really good. Again, it's for us. Reading is our biggest challenge, which again is a common kind of area in lots of schools that serve kind of areas of high deprivation, because along with that you've got language deprivation and children coming into foundation stage early years with very little language. So that is a huge part of what we do, reading to kids, sharing books with kids, talking about books, talking about story. I can't go into the whole nonsense of the national curriculum writing stuff, but you know, an awful lot, a lot of that detracts from helping kids to become brilliant writers, helping them to become avid readers. And that's what we really focus on hard. And as a result, our kids do, like I say, they do really well in their SATs. It's not easy, but we work hard at it.
That's nice. People sometimes say it's one or the other. Oh, well, we'd love to do this, but we've got to get the results. We're saying it's not about not getting the results or not making Ofsted happy. You can do that as well, but there is always another way. Part of your bravery as well, Jonathan, is what you choose not to teach what you think you probably should be teaching or what other schools think they should be teaching, but actually we're not going to bother with that. We'll go for depth. We're just going to get rid of half the curriculum because who cares? And the other thing as well that resonates what you said is that schools that get to good and think they can get to outstanding by being gooder, but sometimes you need to break good to get to that next level, not just be more good. And I think you exemplify that. How are we doing for time? We've got 5 minutes. Mark, in terms of sort of Ofsted and SATs, because people will ask such things, what's the impact of the way that you work on those two markers? And then also as another marker, workload. And there are benefits in the ways you work where you actually get most of your Sundays and your evenings free because of how you set things up. So there are other benefits from turning things on their head, as well as children doing better and being better thinkers and everything. Take us through that, Mark. Start with the S and the O word.
So SATs, the school I'm at currently is below national average, but that didn't stop Ofsted making us rating us as good. And actually we're not, sort of like on that pursuit of, sort of getting gooder, to sort of coin your phrase. Actually, we're looking at what the children need, and we've recognised what the children need and addressing that, reading being a big issue. The difficulty we have, although we've got the deprivation, but where you look at the data, actually, what you get coming through the door isn't what the data tells you. And we know that from the number of children that needed computers and the number of children that needed to go in that were vulnerable during lockdown. And obviously we're doing a lot of work on parental support and getting them to understand. But where we are, as I say, Ofsted haven't stopped us being good, and that's under the new regime. So that's something that's really pleasing. From in terms of workload, one of the things I always think is if you give, within half a term, if you can train the children properly in terms of proper self-assessment, definitely proper peer assessment, so that they're very clear on what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, they will do the correct feedback to everyone. And my marking from half term onwards literally consists of going around and checking and mainly writing I agree, because they can actually do things for themselves. And one of the biggest things I would say to all primary colleagues is almost all of us will have non-negotiables up on our classroom walls. Make sure your non-negotiables aren't what you accept. So, for example, and ask yourself, why are they? So why in year 6 are we still saying, oh, I need to remember full stops and capital letters? It goes back to that progression. We know where that is in the writing progression. So don't do that there, because actually certainly if they come up without capital letters, send them back, sort of put the onus on them. Try and remember that there's going to be at least 30 of them and there's one of you, and that should be the workload balance, in my view. And just one quick thing on what Jonathan said
Yes.
about CPD. One of the best CPDs we did with changing our curriculum I was asked to do the curriculum in July, the last inset of the year, ready for coming back in September. And the best thing I did was I ordered loads of clay. The staff came in and I asked them to make things what they would expect for their respective year groups, and they had all the they could do whatever they wanted. And we actually did our clay curriculum for art, only one very small part of it, because actually they could all see what each other was doing, and we could talk about, well, to do that in year 3, what skills do they need in year 2, and what would they have been introduced to in year 1? And it all went sort of belly up, because our early years practitioners said, well, they would have been doing all of those things down in early years. So, and then we all went back to the drawing board. But it certainly prevents us having year 5 work that looks like year 3 and actually looks like what they were already doing in early years. So you can have some fun with it, but getting the staff together is vital.
Yeah, I love that. I love the creativity and the bravery with which you work, Mark, and you just make it sound so obvious. Well, why? Of course, we got a load of clay and did that as our CPD to design the whole curriculum through clay. Of course, we did that. What's wrong with that? We got 1 minute to go. I'm going to give you each a sentence. We've got 78 people are still with us, which is pretty good considering it's 8:30 on a school night. For most people, just give us one sentence to finish, something inspiring, something memorable, something that will encourage and encourage les autres. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go. I think do less, do it better.
There we go. Short. Fewer words as well. Do less, do it better. I like that. I'll come to you later, Howell. You look vexed. Pick a book behind you, read something out. There might be a quotes book there.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Yeah, I'll go next. There's been people expressing concern about doing things this way. Just remember, it's always easier to seek forgiveness than ask permission first.
Just go for it and then see what happens. Yeah. I like that. Debbie and Howell, who wants to go?
I'm gonna quote somebody else and opt out, but I was talking to Pazzi Solberg this week, and he said, "Why are you all talking about lost learning and catching up? Why aren't you talking about children's well-being?" And his summary position was, if you didn't have so many damn tests in your curriculum, you wouldn't be worrying about them missing out on the test. You'd be worrying about how they're feeling. And I think that's what we need to do as we move forward.
And who was saying that? Pazzi Solberg, you say the Finnish educator. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I like the circles you move in.
I like the circles I'm moving.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Howell, which global influential education name have you spoken with this week?
I was in comms with Mick Waters, and
that's good.
And Deborah, and he said I referred to the school year as an academic year, and he said, don't call it that, call it a creative year, call it an imaginative year. Academic is only part of it.
Yeah, no, that's nice. You always get wisdom from Mick Waters. I'll leave with something which is at the beginning of Deborah's book, The Curriculum of Hope, from Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Thank you, all of you, for the hope that you've given us. Hopefully, our participants have left full of hope, full of optimism, full of this sense that things can get better and I can do something about it. I love the fact that you are doing what you do, that you do it with such passion and such skill, and that you are happy to be part of the independent thinking family. That just it fills me with pride. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nina, lurking in the background. If you want any more information from any of these people, lovely people here, then drop us an email, ian@independentthinking.co.uk or @ITL Worldwide on Twitter. Reach out, make contact. This is being recorded. We'll make the recording available over the next few days. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you ever so much. Bye.